Hi, just a quick disclaimer. This episode discusses real crimes, human remains, missing people, and disturbing discoveries. Some of the cases are independently documented, while others are personal accounts or internet stories that have not been confirmed. When a story cannot be verified, I will tell you so. The purpose of this episode is to explore the phenomenon or the stories surrounding it, not to present internet rumors as proven facts. There is something very starting to be normal, but is unsettling, about allowing a machine to decide where you are going, particularly when the machine does not know you and does not know the places you are familiar with and doesn't know the neighborhoods you avoid or does not know what you consider safe. After all, it's just a prompt and a random algorithm. And normally, when we decide to explore somewhere, there is at least a little bit of intention behind that decision. I don't know about you, but I do. And when we choose a restaurant because we know it's there, or we visit a beach because somebody recommended it, or we walk through a park because we've seen it before, and even when we decide to get lost for a while, we usually remain within a world that is familiar enough for us to find our way back home. Randonautica takes that idea and turns it upside down because it's choosing the destination for you. You allow an application to generate a location somewhere within the radius around you, and then you are invited to go and see what it's there. I know it sounds like harmless until you remember that the world contains things that you normally have no reason to encounter. There are abandoned buildings that you would, well, I think that normally you would never work towards that, or private properties that you would never normally enter. You have isolated roads that you would never drive down, and strange objects that people have left behind. Places where accidents have happened, places where crimes have happened, and places where somebody might have been standing only minutes before you arrived. Most of the time, of course, it's the random coordinate, it's going to lead you to something completely normal. Maybe, just a patch of grass, a road, a house, a tree, or a simple location that it's not interesting enough to, doesn't justify the journey. And those experiences rarely become stories because there's nothing to tell. It's so ordinary. And nobody will upload a viral video saying, "We followed Randonautica for 20 minutes and found this normal, perfect field." Because the stories that we find out is normally when it's not very normal. And that is how Randonautica became something much bigger than an usual navigation application. During pandemic, when millions of people were spending enormous amounts of time indoors, and social media had become one of the main ways people entertain themselves and started their own business online, their own branding, Randonautica became a kind of a digital dare. And users could generate a location, and sometimes while concentrating on an intention or theme, and then travel to discover whatever happened to be waiting over there. And the app itself describes this as a way of testing the relationship between intention, randomness, and what it calls mind matter interaction. It's on their website, while also encouraging people to explore places outside their normal routines. And then, in the summer of 2020, something happened in Seattle that transformed Randonautica from an obscure internet curiosity into one of the strangest stories associated with mobile application. There are many other apps, I'm not going to say names, but there are many other apps. I honestly had a friend that she invited me once to follow one of those apps similar to Randonautica. And I looked at it, researched about it, and I said, no, thank you. She didn't have any story to tell me, so I imagine that nothing happened. So But before we get into that case, however, I want to make one thing very clear because this episode is an investigation into the story surrounding Randonautica. And this is not an attempt to turn every viral video into a proven paranormal event. Not at all. Not all of them are either scary or spooky or paranormal. They are scary because they are real. And some of the materials we are going to discuss is supported by police records, of course, you know me by now, and court proceedings and contemporary news reports, with other stories coming from YouTube creators or Reddit users who say these things happened to them, but whose accounts I have not been able to independently verify. But I will tell you that. And I'm going to tell you also that there is a different an important difference between saying this happened and saying this person says it happened. The distinction is not that it's very uninteresting, but in some cases, you know me, I prefer to go research and to find something that is more real than to guess. But because if you are left with the same question that I had, is that did it actually happen there? But let's jump into it. Welcome back, guys, to the Storytelling Podcast, your cozy corner of captivating tales. I'm your host, Alejandra, and today we are investigating the strange stories surrounding Randonautica, the application that became famous for sending people to random coordinates, and that, according to some of the people who used it, sometimes appeared to lead them directly towards things they could never have experienced finding it. We are going to begin with one case that we know really happened. There is many videos and there is police records about it, because unlike many of the stories circulating online, this one ended up involving a genuine murder investigation with two real victims, a convicted killer, and a discovery that was captured on social media and watched by millions, if not billions by now, of people. And just to remind you that this channel is made for you to binge. Many more episodes are waiting for you here on the channel. If you prefer a visual experience, you can also find the episodes on YouTube, where you can watch and listen at the same time. Our story number one is the Suitcase at Alki Beach. It was June 19th of 2020, and a group of teenagers were spending time around the waterfront in West Seattle while filming content for TikTok. At the time, Randonautica was spreading rapidly across social media, and the basic idea was simple enough to understand, even if the theory behind it sounded strange. The application would generate a random geographical point, a coordinate, and the user could decide whether to travel there. The teenagers were interested in the app because it offered exactly the kind of experience that worked well on TikTok. There was this element of mystery, and there was this journey, and the anticipation of discovering something unexpected. And because the destination was randomly generated, nobody watching the video could know what would happen next. They eventually ended up around the Duwamish Head area near Alki Avenue, where the waterfront meets the rocks and the beach. Nothing about the location suggested that they were approaching a crime scene. It was not an abandoned warehouse hidden behind a locked gate or something obviously dangerous, a dangerous location that would make a person to stop and reconsider their journey. It was just a normal part of Seattle waterfront, and as far as the teenagers were concerned, they were there because an application just told them to go there. Then they noticed a suitcase. And of course, the video can be found in numerous places online. I'm not going to add it here because of the suitcase, of course. And the suitcase itself was not enough to make them panic, and people leave strange things behind all the time, especially around beaches and waterways. And at first, discovery was simply another unexpected object that had appeared at the end of their Randonautica adventure. And they were filming, and the suitcase naturally became the focus of the attention, because the suitcase was sitting along the rocks, and and they started to ask, like, why is it here and what's inside of it? But the teenagers noticed there was a smell, and they began to realize that whatever was inside the suitcase was not a normal luggage. And when they opened it, they discovered a black bag containing human remains. Contemporary reporting dis- described the discovery as a suitcase and additional bags containing the remains of two people. And Seattle police confirmed that teenagers had posted that same video showing the discovery. At that point, the entire meaning of that afternoon changed for everyone. So the kids, they were shocked. You can hear during the video, you can hear that some of them got sick, not because of what they found, because of the smell, because of everything that was going on. They started to scream, and it was shock. No one is going to go to the beach and expect to find an evidence of a murder. And they had not been searching for missing person, and they hadn't been looking for human remains. They were just having fun. And they have been following a random location generated by an application, and now they are standing beside a suitcase that contained evidence of a violent crime. The victims were eventually identified as a 35-year-old Jessica Lewis and 27-year-old Austin Wenner, and investigators determined that both had been shot. Their deaths were ruled homicide, of course, and the investigation eventually led to Michael Dudley, the man who had been their landlord. Dudley was convicted of second-degree murder and in April 2023 was sentenced to 46 years and 8 months in prison. And the important thing here is that the murder is not the only Randonautica legend. And it's not a legend because the victims were real. It was a real crime and the bodies were there. The investigation was there. And conviction, you can find it online. It was done. At least justice was made. And the teenagers really did discover the remains only by filming their adventure and posting it online. The video is not online anymore. Of course, you can find people that had, downloaded the video and just forwards and just reshared. But there is another part of the story that has been repeated so many times online that it has almost been impossible to separate the documented event from the mythology that grew around it, the legend. The teenagers were using Randonautica, and because the application had generation destination, people began wondering whether there was any connection between the random coordinates and the bodies. Had the app somehow know what was there? Had intentions they were thinking about influenced the destination? And did the application somehow guide them towards something that they were never supposed to discover? There is no evidence, of course, in establishing any of those things. The police did not announce that Randonautica had somehow located the bodies, and the conviction of Michael Dudley did not depend upon the application. It was the evidence of the murder case that was the evidence of a conventional criminal investigation, and this was not supernatural at all. And yet, I think there is something more disturbing about the real explanation because the bodies were already there. The murder had already happened. And for what was noticed on the police report, several days. Someone had unalive Jessica Lewis and Austin Wenner. They had turned the bodies and had placed the remains into bags and suitcases and had left those remains around the Seattle waterfront. And the teenage did not create the horror by using Randonautica. It simply happened to walk into a place where somebody else's horror had already taken place. If it wasn't these teenagers to find it, maybe someone else would find them. Now imagine that moment from their perspective, because this is where the story becomes more difficult to forget. I haven't forgotten this video, and I have heard so many, I have researched so many stories about Randonautica, but this one was the most impactant. You have spent the day filming something that it was supposed to be fun with your mates, and you are probably thinking about what the video will look like. This will be so much fun, people will watch it, and the location will be interesting because at this time Randonautica was already online, but it wasn't so much spoken about. And the app maybe can take us something somewhere strange, and then you see a suitcase, and then you open it, and then you understand that you are looking at something that it's not a normal thing. And then the police arrive because they call the police. The teenagers call the police. And they did the right thing, of course. And suddenly there are officers, questions, evidence, photographs, investigators, and a crime scene. And only minutes earlier, you thought that you were making just a little strange TikTok adventure. And before and after the police arrived, they shared the before and after, and then they compile everything into one video with the before and after, just before of finding out, and then when the police were asking them. And there is a reason this case became the story that people remembered. It's not because it's frightening, but because of the coincidence. It's almost too perfect for the internet. Because, you should never believe in the 90% of what you find on the internet, especially on social media. And I do social media for 17 years. So I can tell you, a random exploration app that sends teenagers to a beach. And the teenagers find a suitcase containing the remains of a murder victim. If you believe in science, you might see that this is extraordinary. If you believe in probability, you might seem that this is disturbing coincidence, and I do not believe in coincidence. But if you believe in supernatural, you might ask whether teenagers somehow receive the location because of their intentions. Maybe the victims from the other side could send, find us. And I have read so many theories about this case. I could create just a full-on episode about this, but right below, if you want me to create and share all the information that I have from this case, and I can create just an episode for that. But whatever explanation you choose, there is one fact that none of the interpretations can change, is that they would arrive to the beach and the bodies were already there. And this is where the story of Randonautica becomes much more interesting than a normal ghost story, because the application did not have to create anything supernatural to make people frightened. And going for our story number 2, after the Seattle discovery became real, Randonautica changed from a curiosity into a phenomenon. If you think that people said, no, I'm not going to install Randonautica, we know by now in our historic archive that people will do exactly the opposite. And it went berserk in the middle of teenagers and adults. And people began to testing it. YouTube creators realized that they could turn the application into an endless source of content, because every trip came with its own built-in narrative. First you generate the point, and then you travel towards it, and then you reach the destination, and finally you discover whether the place is normal, or if it's something unexpected, or if something unexpected is waiting for you there. One of the creators who spent a considerable amount of time making Randonautica videos was Jasco. And it was November 2021. And he uploaded a video with the title "Most Terrifying Randonautica Experience. Found Missing Person Suitcase. Police Called." The video is still online. And in its description, Jasco says that he and another person were playing Randonautica in a forest when they found that he described as a missing person suitcase containing items inside. After which the police were called, of course. At least if you are finding something of this caliber, please call the police. Now, this is where the investigation had to slow down, because there is a temptation when telling internet horror stories to move directly from a YouTuber said this happened to this happened. Now, guys, this is not the same thing, okay? The video exists, and you have a creator that made the claim, and the footage exists. But, and this is not to discredit the YouTuber at all, but I have to be devil's advocate. I have not found independent police or news documentation that confirms that the suitcase was officially discovered and it was belonging to a missing person. So I cannot present you the details to you as this is a real or is the established fact. What I can tell you is that the story itself is fascinating, of course, because of the circumstances in which it was presented. Now, according, of course, I'm not going to add the video. You can find it online, and it's up to you to, take it with a grain of salt, shall we? According to the creator, the Randonautica point had taken them into a forest, and the area already felt wrong before they found the suitcase. They were filming the journey because they expected something unusual, but the further they went, the more the environment itself became part of the story. And a forest is always an interesting place to explore during the daylight when you know exactly where you are and you deliberately traveled there because a random application had generated a point, and at the uncertainty becomes the intense part. You do not know the area. You do not know why the coordinate was generated there, and you do not know what you are going to encounter when you reach it. I think that if there is a thrill of getting, I do understand that there is a thrill of you getting a coordinate. Now, it's you can decide if you're going or not, or if you're going to research another place, or if you're going to small or widen the radius, because you can do that on the app. But I think that when you start going online and you start searching and you start seeing a bunch of videos, oh, I saw this, you also, in the back of your mind, whether you believe it or not, you're going to have that feeling of, I am doing the wrong thing, even if you're not, because you are not doing anything, you're just following something. But I think that in the back of your head, your common sense is saying maybe you shouldn't do it because you saw this, and this online. But when the creator showed the suitcase, and if you're watching the video, the object immediately changes the investigation, because the suitcase is not a piece of rubbish that you can find alone in the woods. It suggests that somebody brought it there, and someone carried it there, opened it, closed it, abandoned it, and perhaps lost it. The object has a story even before you know what's inside. If I saw a suitcase, like if I saw a bag, or if I saw a suitcase, which is bigger, I am going to tell someone because what's inside. And when somebody tells you that the contents may be connected to a missing person, that suitcase, something suddenly becomes something else. And of course, you're not thinking, of course, the first thing that you're going to think is that, why did Randonautica send us to this? And personally, I would think, who was here before us? And is that person or people still hidden away? That's my first thing. And that's where the fear comes from, because you have a forest full of things that had happened possibly without witnesses. And when they discover the object that seems to belong to someone or other person, your imagination begins to fill in the blank spaces. You start thinking that the person who owned it, where they went, why did the suitcase was abandoned, and whether the person would left it there or could possibly be still nearby. I would be more scared if someone was still nearby. And again, we do not know that the suitcase was completely or genuinely connected to a missing person. And I want that uncertainty to remain in this story that I'm telling you, because we need to pretend that it wasn't evidence, but I couldn't find it that it was evidence for something. And that's what precisely makes this case useful to understand Randonautica culture. By this point, people were deliberately seeking frightening experiences, either teenagers, kids, or adults. They were seeking frightening experience. Remember you that people do stupid things all the time. Um, but at this point, people were just too bored, and stupidity grew up like 100%. So, yeah, they were seeking frightening evidence and experiences. And after the Seattle story, Randonautica had a boom of app downloads and people just sharing online. It was just a boom. And people were just, filming and publishing and allowing millions of viewers to decide whether the events were coincidence, they were in genuine danger, they were performing. I found so many. If I can tell you that 70% of them, it's fake. They are performing. Good performance though, but I did find, I'm that kind of person that I did find loops on everything. And once the audience begins watching, every strange experience or discovery becomes part of the legend. And this led us to our story number 3, the Pocomoke Forest and the Diary. Now, Jasco later produced another series of Randonautica videos in Maryland Pocomoke Forest. And this time, the story became even darker because the object at the center of this investigation was not a suitcase, but it was a diary. And in August 2022 video, the creator described that he called a terrifying Randonautica experience in the forest and saying that he and his companions found a diary containing a statement about human remains in a lake, while also claiming that they believe people were following them through the area. The video is still available on YouTube, and the description itself makes clear that this is the creator's account of what happened and not this independently established police finding. About thinking about that difference between finding a strange object and finding something written by another human being. Now, a strange object can be explained away very easily. Someone lost it, someone threw it away, someone left it there years ago or last week. But a diary, it's different because writing implies a person. And once you begin reading somebody else's words, you immediately start imagining the person behind it. And the diary, according to the video, referred to human remains in a lake. Now, imagine reading that while standing inside a forest. You do not know who wrote it, and you don't know if it's true. And you do not know if the person who described everything that really happened, writing that fiction, or trying to frighten whoever found the diary, or participating in some elaborate game that had nothing to do with Randonautica. And yet, in that moment, none of the explanations would necessarily make you feel better. Because if you're standing in a forest and someone has left a diary talking about a human remains in a nearby lake, the rational response is not becoming less frightened. You would be frightened for different reasons. But maybe the diary is fake, but who left it there? It might be fake, and the story might be fictional, but why did they choose this particular place? And why did they wrote their remains in the lake? Is just to spook you out? And again, why did your random coordinate lead you there? And if you are convinced that somebody is following you, this forest suddenly becomes this enormous place in which you cannot see very far ahead. I would think about that. This is where the distinction between documented facts and internet storytelling becomes essential. There is no independent evidence that I found establishing that human remains were actually discovered in the lake as a result of this Randonautica trip. And there is no independent evidence proving that the people in the forest were being followed by someone connected to the diary. What we do have is the video and the creator account. But there is one thing that is worth noticing, and again, nothing against the creator. I actually follow him for years, and I love to hear about this. But the creator himself repeatedly frame after frame the experience, and something that happened to him while using the application that generates random destinations. And again, an app gives you the coordinates. It gives you the forest, and then you find the diary in that same coordinate, and then the story about the human remains is inside, and then the random trip has become a mystery. That sequence is exactly what made Randonautica so addictive to internet audiences. You never knew what the next layer was going to be, and that boomed to many people. And our story number 4 is, where is the missing man? This next story is not a YouTube production, and it does not come with this dramatic editing or thumbnail designed to frighten you. It began as a Reddit post written by a user who said they had experienced something so disturbing they still thought about it long after it happened. And the story begins with the missing man. According to this Reddit account, during the summer of 2021, the writer had repeatedly seen missing person information on the local Facebook pages about a man who had disappeared and had not seen through a week and a half. One Saturday, the writer and her boyfriend went into the town center, and while they were there, they saw police and search volunteers checking the water near a riverside car park. She assumed they were searching for the missing man. And while she was waiting for her boyfriend, she opened Randonautica. And then she did something that, in hindsight, she described as macabre. She asked the application, "Where is the missing man?" Yes, because you can ask that. And the coordinate appeared over a pair of large ponds or lakes, roughly 30 to 40 minutes away. And the pin was in the water. She told her boyfriends, and although she felt a bit uneasy about the whole thing, they decided to go and have a look. They walked to the location and found something that made the story less frightening at first. And it was beautiful. The water was calm, and trees surrounding the ponds and old railway line ran nearby, and there were other people in the area. Nothing about that scene looked like a place that something terrible had happened. And they searched the area and saw nothing, and eventually they left. And hours passed, and they returned to the town center, got into their car, and were preparing to leave when her boyfriend looked at his phone. According to her account, he began reacting to a new update about the missing man. He had been found dead in one of those ponds, the same ponds they just visited. The writer said that they returned to the area and found police there, with the road cordoned off. Now, this is one of those stories where I completely understand why the person who experienced it would struggle to dismiss the coincidence. I would say the same to the police. Imagine asking an application where a missing person is, just for, macabre fun, and receive a location over a body of water, and traveling there with your partner and standing beside the water after finding anything, and then discover a few hours later that the missing person had been found dead in the same area. I would replay the trip in my head, and where I stood, and if it was beautiful and everything, and how close were you to the water. And perhaps the worst thought would be, if you had arrived earlier, would the man still be alive? Or if you had looked in slightly a different direction? What if the app somehow brought you there for a reason? And of course, there is no evidence that it did, and this remains just a Reddit account, not a police confirmed Randonautica investigation. And there are many possible explanations on why a random coordinate could fall near a body of water when a missing person was eventually found. But the stories, it struck with me because the person telling it was not claiming that they discovered the body. It was just that strange, very weird coincidence. And, is the fear of realizing that you were standing so close to something terrible without you knowing it, and an app generated with code and algorithm replied to what you were asking. Now, story number 5. It's we moved to something that it was very recent. And this one was posted in July 2026, just last month, by someone who said they had been using Randonautica with a friend in New Jersey Pine Barrens. The Pine Barrens are almost perfect for this kind of story because they contain huge areas of woodland, dirt roads, isolated locations, and the person who wrote the account say they were deep in the area when they generated their first point. That first coordinate led towards a private property, and they didn't continue, of course. And this is the important detail because it demonstrates something that it's easy to forget when watching Randonautic videos. The application can actually generate the location, but it does not know whether you should actually go there. They generated another point. The people generated another point, and this one was about 20 minutes away and led toward the dirt road that the pair knew existed but had never driven down. And before continuing, the user said that they searched the road online because they were aware that there possibly be dangerous situations in the Pine Barrens and wanted to know what they were driving towards because they already had finding that the first pin place was a private location. And that search for the second location changed everything. According to the Reddit post, the search results showed that the location they were approaching was the exact area where a missing person's car had previously become stranded in a mud puddle. The person had apparently left the vehicle on foot and never was found. And then came the second coincidence. The Reddit user remembered seeing a missing person poster almost a month earlier. And when they say later looked back at the video they had recorded, they believe that the person on the poster was the same person connected to the missing vehicle. And this post was published on July 29th of 2026 and received hundreds of upvotes, with the author answering questions from other Reddit users about the experience and saying that the missing person poster had been seen before the Randonautica trip. And again, we need to be very careful because there is no established police case demonstrating that Randonautica located the missing person. The Reddit post is evidence that someone is telling this story, not the evidence that a supernatural interpretation is true. But the reason I think it belongs in this episode is because it demonstrates how Randonautica can create experience that feels almost impossible, even when there is some normal explanations for it. And the person was already aware of that missing person. They knew the area, and they generated a coordinate within a large radius. And the application produced a location of that, according to the account, that corresponded with the last known area associated with the person's vehicle. And perhaps it was all just that, it was a coincidence. But maybe there are more details in the story that we don't know about. But imagine being the person sitting in that car when you realize that you just found someone and you have not been searching for a missing person. You didn't contact the police or you didn't join the search party, as she was saying. But you simply opened an application because you were curious. And remember, this was just the second pin because the first one was a private home. And now the random point on your screen appears to have taken you towards the last known location of someone who disappeared. For our last story, it's all about the woman in the field. And another Reddit account. Reddit is good for these kind of things. This account takes the same idea and makes it even disturbing if you there are many of them. And of course, that's why I tell you have to take it with a grain of salt. Because this time, the writer says that they were already aware that a woman had disappeared in that area. So in March of 2026, a Reddit user wrote that a woman had gone missing near their small town, roughly 5 miles from where they lived. And the writer said that they had already tried to help by asking someone they knew and to search the area using a thermal drone, and nothing was found. In more than 24 hours of the woman disappeared, the writer downloaded Randonautica and generated a point using a radius of approximately 6 miles around their home. The point appeared in the direction of the area where the woman had disappeared, and it landed on this field. The writer decided to investigate and took their teenage son with them. They drove around, they looked through ditches and nearby areas, and because it was starting to get dark and cold, they did not find anything, and they went home. And then the woman was found dead. According to the Reddit account, the body was discovered within approximately 1,000 feet of Randonautica Point. The writer was left disturbed, of course, by this coincidence and more painfully by the thought that perhaps they might have searched the location while she was still alive. And that final thought is what makes this account uncomfortable. It's not really about if Randonautica predicts anything, it's about guilt. And I can honestly, that's why I share this account. But I think that it was the guilt. It's not about, look at what we found in Randonautica. It was, what if I had known? What if I had searched for another 10 more minutes? Or if I had looked into that ditch, or if I'd gone there earlier? Was she still alive when I was standing there? Those questions, for me, is what makes it devastating because there is no answer. And I don't think that the person itself, the writer itself, was going to forget about this. And again, we cannot establish from the Reddit post alone that the application had any connection to the woman's death because it's a random coordinate inside a 6 miles radius and still going to land somewhere. And the research area is already concentrated. But this coincidence is strange, and I do not believe in coincidence. But imagine being the person who generated the coordinate. And imagine later seeing the news and opening the map again. And imagine that that little point was a few meters of something terrible that had happened, just like the before story. You might tell it's coincidence for you, but we don't have any ways to know. And would it change if they went and spent more time or if they went earlier? Or I think that it would still be frightening every time that I open the application afterwards. Personally, I have not downloaded Randonautica. I have seen too many videos. I have read too many things. I am just staying in the way of that. So, if you use Randonautica, please be aware of your surroundings. And please call the police, or if you feel in danger, just get out of there. Or simply, if you see that the coordinate, research the coordinate before. We have internet for that. Just research it and see if it goes to somewhere dodgy. Just don't go. Actually, just delete the application. You don't need it. And now you tell me, oh, Alejandro, but you don't have more stories. First, this is going to be a very long video. By now, it's a very long video. And this will probably not be the last video or podcast episode, whatever you're seeing the podcast or hearing the podcast about Randonautica. There are many good stories. But once I started researching Randonautica, I started to discover that there is this small selection of stories circulating online. And there are videos claiming that users discovered coffins, body bags, weapons, strange notes, abandoned buildings, suspicious people, and, even human remains. And in the end, you have Reddit posts describing everything from inexplicable objects appearing at coordinates to locations that seem to correspond to private memories or traumatic events. And some of the stories, I do believe they are genuine. Um, I also believe that the majority of them are exaggerated. I have seen many of them that are clearly staged. Good performance, though. And some of them involve completely normal coincidences that became more dramatic when they were retold. Because this is what happened when you just retell things. You just add a little bit of things. And some are impossible to investigate because the original video had disappeared. The account has been deleted. It was taken down by the social media channel, and the only evidence that remains is another person retelling of what supposedly happened. And that is why I didn't want to fill this episode with 20 viral stories and tell you every single one of them is real, because that would be easy to do. And I could take a TikTok with frightening caption and describe it dramatically and just add a few details from another website and suddenly said, this is based on the true story. How many times? I have read that and I said, this is not. But that wouldn't be an investigation. And the truth is that Randonautica, they don't need to invest in invented stories. They are already enough real coincidence to make this subject fascinating. You have the Seattle case, which is the biggest one, where the teenagers discover the murder victims. And then you have the two YouTube videos with the creators that they documented, they told their side of the story. And you have loads of Reddit accounts. But there is an account that I'm going to bring you on the next one about the Mexicans that were on the wrong place at the wrong time and involves cartels, for example. You have in Spain, you have thousands of stories in Spain. And I'm going to bring them into another episode later on. But when you hear one of the cases and you start going into that rabbit hole, you will learn that internet folklores works 1,000 times. And Randonautica may be one of the most efficient modern machines to create these stories. I think that there is another reason, and just to end this podcast, that it's already too long. I think there is another reason that we can feel more frightening than the normal ghost stories. Because if you think about it, none of the stories that I told you had a ghost stories unless you want to take it from a call from beyond. But the current app describes going even further and describing the experience of a way of testing whether the mind can influence reality and invite users to explore the possibility of their thoughts, emotions, and words into the physical world. But that does not prove that the thoughts influence random coordinates. But psychologically, it changes the experience. Because if I tell you to walk down a random street and see what you find, you are simply exploring. But if I tell you to think very carefully about something before generating the coordinates, and then every discovery you make afterwards can feel connected somehow. If you think about money and discover a coin, you might remember it. If you think about love and find a heart painted on a wall, you will remember it. And if you think about death and find a cemetery, you will also remember it. But if you think about a missing person and the application gives you a point nearby a body of water where the person is later found, you never stop wondering about that connection. This is where psychology and mystery meets. Our brains are extraordinarily good at finding patterns, and they are especially good at finding patterns in events that matters emotionally to us. We do not remember every random coordinate that led into an empty field. We remember the coordinates that led into something meaningful. This does not make the experience a fake one. This makes a human perception that is part of that story. And perhaps that is why Randonautica can feel so frightening, even when there is no evidence of anything supernatural. The application does not simply send you to somewhere, it sends you somewhere you ask for with the meaning you ask for. This leads us to the more adult part of this because Randonautica itself does not know if a location is safe. The company's own terms explicitly tell users not to trespass, not to travel to dangerous locations, and not to assume that a generated coordinate is safe or legal to access. Its official guide, because obviously they had to, always warns users away from railroads, dangerous structures, and nighttime exploration. It's on their website, on their fact page, and recommends using common sense and traveling with others and retreating if a location feels unsafe. This is important because the internet makes dangerous exploration look like entertainment. You watch somebody walk into an abandoned building and the video itself has millions of views. I have seen this. You watch somebody explore a forest at midnight and the comments are full of people asking them to go deeper. You watch somebody discover a suspicious object and suddenly thousands of people want to know what happens next on their lives. I have seen this. The audience, your audience, if you are a creator and hearing this, your audience is sitting safely at home. The person filming is the one standing there. The audience does not have to climb the fence, and the audience also does not have to walk down that dark road. They, your audience, does not have to find out whether somebody else is already inside the building and waiting for you. And your audience does not have to deal with the consequences if something goes wrong, either physical, mentally, or if you are dead. This is why I would never want this episode to become an advertisement for dangerous randonauticking. Because you don't need a ghost to get hurt. You need to be alive. And you need to go onto a rotten floor. And you need to steep down. And there is an angry property owner. I've seen some of them. There is a train. There is a bad road. There is a stranger or an armed stranger. And there is bad weather. You can get lost and you have a dying phone battery. The application itself warns users about these possibilities, and that warning is worth taking seriously. If you ever decide to use Randonautica, do not let the stories convince you that the most frightening destination is automatically the most interesting one. If the coordinate takes you somewhere private, please leave it. If you think that it leads you to something dangerous, do not go. If you arrive in the atmosphere, your sixth sense, whether you believe it or not, if you feel wrong because a location might be unsafe, just turn around, get into your car, or run away. If you discover something that could be evidence of a crime, do not touch it. If you touch it, do not move it. And if you do not stay there trying to make a viral video, get yourself somewhere safe and contact the appropriate authorities. Do not put yourself in dangers because there is a difference between reading a Reddit post, hearing a podcast video, or seeing a video on YouTube. Sometimes curiosity can make it very difficult to recognize the difference, and you can be endangered with your mates. And this is me telling you this because I want you safely listening and seeing the videos comfortably where you are, just comfortably and cozy. And because sometimes, the thrill is really not worth it. And, sometimes the safest mystery is the one that you decide not to investigate. Sometimes the what if is just to stay at home. And why not turn your podcast on and just hear me out? And this was today's episode, guys. I hope you liked it. And comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever tried Randonautica? Do you have any stories from yourself or from any of your friends with Randonautica? You know that you can always comment below or send your emails. And if you prefer a visual experience, you can also find the episodes on YouTube where you can watch and listen at the same time. And just to remind you that this channel is made for you to binge with many more episodes waiting for you. And thank you for listening. And please remember that if you'd like to send your stories or special topics to be shared in the next episodes, you can send them to the storytellingpodcast80 at gmail.com or follow me on social media at the Storytelling Podcast Official. But before you go, if you haven't done that already, I would love for you to click on the follow or subscribe button and see you on the next episode.